This dude had a lot of dreams throughout his life. His idea about his country was over the top, and he wanted to create the most powerful country in the world. To start off, we have to start in the beginning of the 20th century, when Henry Ford has started Ford Motor Company, and for the first time ever, he has perfected the assembly line. And one of the things Henry Ford did was that almost every American could afford a Ford Model T. This was all possible because of the assembly line, because it made things cheaper and quicker. Beforehand, nobody could buy a car unless you were extremely wealthy or a king. Henry Ford's story went all over the world, and one of the people that was very interested was Adolf Hitler. When he heard the story about Henry Ford, he wasn't the Führer, and he wasn't anyone important. He was just a young guy that was admired by Henry Ford, and he was impressed in what he did for the American people. Time goes on, and Hitler is the leader of Nazi Germany now. In 1933, when he's the leader of the new German regime, the idea of Henry Ford has not left his mind yet, and he basically wanted to take his idea and create a German version of it. At that time in the US, for every 5 person, there was 1 car. But in Germany, that same stat was 50 people per car. The first thing Hitler requested was to find the greatest engineer and designer in Germany we have today. There was a person living in Germany at that time by the name of Ferdinand Porsche. You should be familiar with that last name. Ferdinand Porsche was basically a designer for other car companies at this time, and he was considered a designer and an engineer. Before this took place, the most famous design he had was the Mercedes-Benz SSK. One of the interesting parts about Ferdinand's life is that he really didn't have a degree in any types of designing or engineering. He was mostly a self-made engineer and designer. You could say it was in his genes to be an engineer and designer. Either way, Hitler's agents find him, put him in a bag and bring him to the Führer. But that was a joke. They respectfully requested him because the leader wanted to see him. Basically, this is how the conversation went. Hitler asked if you know Henry Ford. Ferdinand answers absolutely. Hitler basically tells him he wants to do the same idea in Germany. You have to design a car that's simple, cheap, huge production numbers, no issues, and the price should be set in a way where every German is able to afford it. Ferdinand Porsche accepted the deal and said he'll try his best in creating the best car he can. After Ferdinand Porsche left, you could tell Hitler was not happy with his men at that time because he told them to bring a German to his office. Ferdinand was not a German, he was from Czechoslovakia, but he was living at Germany at that time, and he was the best auto designer and engineer, so that is why they brought him to Hitler. But Hitler tells his men to not worry, because Ferdinand seems like a special kind of guy. So the first thing you have to do is get rid of his Czechoslovakian passport and make him a German citizen, even give him a passport. It's good to know that Hitler didn't only hate Jews, he hated Czechoslovakian and other types of races. You can't say he was obsessed with Henry Ford, but he really admired him. And when he had absolute power and he was the leader of Nazi Germany, he even had a picture of Henry Ford in his office. He wasn't only a fan of the Ford Motor Company, he was also the fan of his ideology, because Henry Ford was also an anti-Semite. There is a writing from Henry Ford in the year 1920, and it's called The International Jew. At that time, this writing was still considered a conspiracy theory, because he wrote that all the money belongs to Jewish people, and they're basically trying to create a one-world government and take over the world. After Hitler read his writing, his love for Henry Ford went up exponentially, and in his personal book Mein Kampf, he pretty much said the same thing. But let's go back to Ferdinand Porsche and see what he's doing. In the year 1937, Ferdinand designed his car and he named it the Porsche Type 60, and he brings a model for Hitler to see. You can tell by the picture because Hitler really loved the design of the car. He basically told him he loves the car, but he does not like the name of it. Don't name it the Porsche Type 60, name it Volkswagen, which basically means people car in German. And Porsche accepts it and names it the Volkswagen Type 1, which is known as the Beetle today. Less than 2 years has passed and Germany begins World War II. When the war begins, Hitler asks for Ferdinand Porsche once again. He tells him to put Volkswagen aside and build tanks and military vehicles. Since Porsche was an engineer by heart, he knew exactly what to do and accepted the order. There is a lot of tanks that was used in World War II that were designed by Ferdinand Porsche. Tanks like Tiger I, Tiger II, and a certain type of Panzer. The Germans used all three of these tanks throughout World War II. As you know, the war started, but it went on for 6 years and Germany was defeated. Until then, the Volkswagen Type 1 was not built yet. After the fall of Berlin, a lot of Hitler's men were arrested, and Ferdinand Porsche was one of them. And after some time, they realized that Ferdinand Porsche wasn't really part of the regime, and he was just a designer and engineer, so they released him. When Ferdinand Porsche was in prison, his son by the name of Ferry Porsche was basically running the company, but he wasn't able to do much because the industry was in the British and American hands at that time. You could say when Ferdinand Porsche is released from prison, he's very old and he doesn't have the energy he used to, and the defeat of his country was obviously not good on him. But his oldest son was still going strong and he didn't lose hope, and he wanted to start the Porsche factory again. Until the year 1948, the entire Western Germany industry was in American and British hands, and Porsche and Volkswagen industry were in the west side. And then eventually, in 1948, the Allies gave the companies back to the German government and people. The Porsche factory was given back to Ferry Porsche, but since Volkswagen was under the Nazi regime, it was given to the new German government. Volkswagen Type 1, also known as the VW Beetle, was completely designed and ready for production, so you could start the factory and begin building these by tomorrow. The German government assigns a CEO for the Volkswagen company by the name of Heinrich Nordhoff. He basically begins the company and turns Volkswagen inside out, and you can't find a person around the world that doesn't know this car. Volkswagen Beetle has one of the highest production numbers. Over 20 million of these have been sold around the world. Ferdinand Porsche dies in the year 1951, but his son, that was an engineer and designer just like him, continued the Porsche brand and company, and he basically designed and built the first ever Porsche. This is that car, the Porsche 356. You could say Ferdinand had a happy death because before his death, he saw this car and he was happy that he's gonna give the torch to his son now. When the 356 first came out in the year 1948, it had a base price of about $3,750, and that was a very expensive car for them. They produced the 356 for about 15 years, and 76,000 of them were built. If you find a legit 356 in good condition nowadays, they could be priced from $1 to $2 million. But that's for the early ones. The more newer you get, when you get closer to the 1960s, the cheaper they get. And by cheap, we mean about $300,000. Ferdinand Porsche began this company in 1932, but it was mostly a warehouse rather than a factory, and the war didn't allow him to build his own company. But Ferry Porsche, his son, turned this little warehouse into one of the biggest car companies in the world. And nowadays, Porsche cars are known as one of the highest quality cars ever built. Since the beginning of time, they say if you want it, you'll do it. And you could tell Ferdinand Porsche's son wanted to take his dad's company to the top.